Hi, this is Ellen Gunlock from Purdue University, and I'm glad that you could join us for today's CauseWeb Teaching and Learning webinar with Rob Gould. I'd like to just give you an overview of how the webinar will work. First of all, everybody is muted except for the person who's speaking. And if you have a question for Rob Gould, please type your question into the question box, and then at the end I'll be happy to ask those questions to Rob. Also, at the very end of the webinar, when you log out, there will be a short survey that you can fill out to talk about the webinar itself and make comments to Rob, and it would be great if you could take some time to do that. So at this time, I would like to hand things over to Rob Gould, who will be talking about DataFest, teaching data science through data hackathons. Go ahead, Rob.
All right, thank you, Ellen, and thank you all for joining me today. I hope I anticipate most of your questions, but I'm looking forward to hearing any questions you have at the end. My planned outline for today is to talk about first, what is an ASA DataFest, and then why it was started, and give you some sense of what it feels like to be there, and focus most of the discussion on how you might host your own. So to get started, what is ASA DataFest? Well, I've described it in many ways. One is a big data hackathon. So if you're not familiar with it, hackathons are kind of a staple now of the programming world, and they're usually one-day events or weekend events where programmers get together to kind of create code under a particular theme. And in fact, I was kind of inspired by DataFest after hearing a news article on the radio about a hackathon where coders got together to create apps that could assist earthquake relief in Haiti, however many years ago that was. But this is different, and it's a little more directed, and students are given one data set and asked to find some insight in it. We call it big data, but everyone has a different definition of what that means. And in truth, this isn't big data in the industry sense. The files tend to be about 1 gigabyte, sometimes 2. But they're bigger than almost every student has ever seen before. And what's more important is they're very rich. They're very, usually a great number of variables. It goes all weekend long. It's a celebration, which means that we try to keep it lively and fun. It's an educational event. It's kind of edutainment in a way. What it is not is it's not a modeling competition. In fact, one year we talked a lot about whether there was a data set that lends itself to kind of a predictive approach. And we decided against that because if the only approach to the data set is to do a prediction, then it kind of eliminates everyone who hasn't studied that very well. So we want to find data that's accessible to a wide number of students. A lot of students come, a lot of them come hoping to win, and a lot of them come hoping to learn, and so we want to provide an access point for everyone. But most of all, it's about doing service to the data and not about fitting particular models or applying particular statistical approaches. So why do we do this? Well, so one reason for starting DataFest was to provide access to data that we can't easily get into our classrooms. The data we provide for DataFest takes a long time to prepare. We usually work closely with a statistician or a data scientist or an engineer at a particular company or organization. Even they are usually surprised by how long it takes to get us the data. It's kind of been an interesting to peer into other companies' data cultures. They do go through a lot of effort to anonymize the data so that it's protects people's privacy, so it takes a lot of resources, and it's just something that's really difficult to get in the classroom. And in fact, almost every data set we've had, the providers have asked that we not use it outside of this event. So it's important enough to them that they don't feel comfortable sharing it widely. So students get to see a really unique data set that they haven't seen yet. Another reason is just that it's a friendly competition, and some students find that very inspiring. We try to encourage in our curriculum teamwork and group work, but this really does require teamwork. The short time span and the lot of work to accomplish means that students really have to divide their work. They have to work together very closely and well. And this is probably one of the biggest challenges of the event. So when we lose teams, it's almost always because of differences among the teams and disagreements within the team. In fact, this year we had one team where all but one person quit on Saturday night, and the poor person presented by themselves on Sunday, but did a pretty good job. I thought it was important to kind of culturally indoctrinate students into the statistics world. They don't often see us working as statisticians, so while they're working, they're getting help from faculty and graduate students and what we're calling industry VIPs, visitors who we recruit from local industry to come by, and so they get to see us thinking and working as statisticians, and so it's maybe the first time they've seen that. Another reason that's maybe the weakest of them all, but I still find a little interesting, is there's this debate about what is statistics and what is data science, and I see this as kind of a natural experiment. And what I mean by that is we have statistics students, we have computer science students, we have engineering students, we have political science students, all sorts of students compete in this event, and it's just kind of interesting to see what set of tools and what set of experiences turn out to be most important. If I had to report on this very informal experiment right now, I would say that they matter less than we might think if the students are working well in a team. That pretty much all of these different backgrounds have something valuable contribute if they're able to synthesize that information within their team. So that's why it was started. I could probably think of other reasons, but the main idea was to provide this kind of one big grand event that got students to do more than they thought they could do. So what's it like if you go to a data fest? The picture below maybe gives you some idea. We meet Friday at 6 p.m. and we meet in a main hall and we meet the data. This year we were fortunate enough to have representatives from Edmunds.com who provided the data come and talk to the students about the data just for a short time, just 10 or 15 minutes, to give them an overview of why the data are important and what they want to learn from the data. After that, we serve pizza and everyone gets to work, and it's pretty much work and food for the next 48 hours, well, a little less than 48 hours. On Sunday, all work stops at a designated time and we begin the presentations. And part of the fun of the presentations, each team makes a presentation to a panel of judges, and the presentations are limited to 2 slides and 5 minutes, which is, as you can imagine, a very strict time limit. This strict time limit has many benefits. Of course, it has some disadvantages. It's kind of borrowed from what I know of the hackathon culture, where they often have very short times to present their work. One of the benefits of it is it really forces conciseness. It means in the presentations you don't hear students giving a blow-by-blow detail and narrative of what they tried, and then they tried this, and then they tried that. It really forces them to think about what the message is that they want to communicate, and to communicate that really clearly. And again, this is where teamwork really comes to play. Another advantage, which took a little while to realize, is it makes it more fun. It makes it more game-like. Students understand that, you know, the best work may not result in the best presentation. The best presentation may not reflect the absolutely best worst. So this is where it maybe differs from a poster competition in that it adds an element of fun and a little bit of element of chance to the whole thing. So students are competing for 3 different prizes, which we modify a little bit from year to year, but these are the main ones. Best recommendation is kind of what it says. Sometimes we call it best insight. Sometimes we call this best in show, but I'm trying to downplay that. But it's a presentation that really kind of nails it and tells everyone and the judges something that they didn't know before, that could only be learned through the data, and tells it well. Best visualization is probably the most straightforward of the prize. It's more than just a pretty picture, but it's a pretty picture that gives us some insight that we wouldn't otherwise have had, and of course addresses the main gist of the competition. I'll tell you a little more about this year's competition too, so you'll understand what the context is. And then my favorite, but maybe the least understood, is best use of external data. And the idea behind this is very often when dealing with kind of these large complex data sets, is that as large as they are, they can often benefit by being supplemented by more data. This prize kind of goes in different directions. Some years it rewards students and teams who found who scraped together a pretty difficult data set and did something kind of surprising with it that supported their main analysis. And other years it goes for teams that supplement the context of the data in a way that leads to additional insight that maybe we wouldn't have had otherwise. To give you one example of that that's still kind of my favorite, was the very first year we did DataFest. The data came from the Los Angeles Police Department, and they provided data on every arrest that had been made in the last 5 years. So there were, unfortunately, millions of them. One of the variables, of course, was the type of crime and all this, many other sorts of details about crimes and arrests. And a lot of students kind of focused on trying to describe and map where violent crimes of different types were happening. And one team had some insight of going out, and they got some help from one of our visitors who pointed them in the right direction, and found maps of gang territories in Los Angeles. So they were able to superimpose these territories on top of the maps of where homicides had occurred and observe that the homicides clustered along these boundaries. And so that was an example of how that additional bit of data, the data being the mappings of gang territories, gave us insight that we otherwise wouldn't have had. So those are the 3 prizes. We choose a winner and a runner-up, and what they actually win took us a while to kind of come up with a good prize. But it's a relatively inexpensive medallion that has a nice hefty weight to it and is engraved with the day, date, and the name of the event. And it comes on a very pretty, shiny red ribbon that you hang around their neck. And that seems to make everyone happier than any other prize we can get. And it's not too expensive. The students work in teams of up to 5, and 5 seems to be that they work hard to get up to that limit. And so that means if you're giving 3 prizes, you need to have 15 things to give away. And so medallions turn out to be a pretty nice thing. They're not terribly expensive. We also give them certificates, but that's less expensive and maybe less valued. So in the past, what we've had for data, I mentioned the Los Angeles Police Department. I haven't talked about, second year we had Kiva.org. Kiva.org is a micro-loan lending website, and the job there was to try to understand what factors contributed to people's donating money and what factors contributed to people's paying back of loans. The third year was eHarmony. This is a dating website. This was probably one of the more popular data sets we've had. The next year was GridPoint. GridPoint does very extensive and detailed monitoring of electric consumption of large retail entities, restaurants, box stores, things like that. And they provide visualizations of this energy consumption back to the client with the goal of helping them conserve energy. And then this year was Edmunds.com. Edmunds.com is a car buying website. You go online, you can choose and outfit a car. If you were selling a car, you can see what it's valued at. And it included data about visitors' pathways through the website, and also information about who bought cars, if they eventually ended up buying cars, where they bought them from. If they did buy it from a dealer, then there was lots of data about that dealer, what their inventory was, and things along those lines. So it was a very rich data set. It was the best supported data set we've had, and that Edmunds.com made a real effort to send people out to all the sites to serve as judges and consultants and really supported the students and also provided a lot of publicity. So that was really great. So this year we had DataFest hosted at 7 institutions, which you can see there, and students from about 21 colleges and universities participated. You can count that. I think it's 21. We started with just one at UCLA, and then next we added Duke, and then the 5 colleges, and it's growing fairly rapidly. So I next want to talk about what you might want to do if you plan to start your own DataFest. So the best place to get started is here, amstat.org/education/datafest. And here you'll kind of find all the information you need to get started. It has some general information about what is a DataFest and what you need to do to participate as an official ASA DataFest participant, host site. Probably the most important link here is on the left-hand corner. You can see ASA DataFest in a box. And that's a site, once you click through there, that we provide lots of useful support materials, or materials that we hope are useful, and we're always looking for suggestions for how to improve that. So I'll give you some idea of what's inside that box. Some general advice that we offer is, if it's your first time, you should start small. Probably between 20 and 40 students is a pretty good number to handle. Then choose a weekend. It takes a whole weekend, and find a place to host it. Often that comes in the other order. You have to first find a space and then see which weekends are available. As you're about to learn, we're insisting to be participating in the official event, that your event happen in the spring in a 4 to 6 week window in March and April, and I'll explain why in a moment. You'll need some judges. 3 is a good number. Odd numbers are good. Judges rarely agree, and so having an odd number means that there will be no ties. We try to get a statistician and someone with some familiarity with the data, and sometimes someone with a kind of unusual point of view, like perhaps they're a journalist, or someone who works with data or consumes presentations of data, and might be a good judge of what is a good presentation, a clear presentation. You should recruit visitors who come and visit and help the students. We recruit through 2 organizations, our local American Statistical Association, so Southern California chapter and the Orange County chapter. We also recruit from the R users group, and of course our own faculty and other faculty. The idea is to ask people to just come and visit for an hour and wander around the room, and if they have nothing else to say to students, ask them to ask the students what they're working on, and often the students, that sets up a dialogue, and the visitor realizes pretty quickly where the weaknesses are and where they can help. Many times I've had visitors who've reluctantly agreed to come for an hour out of a sense of obligation, and have stayed for many hours because they said they had such fun. So I think our visitors really enjoy it. I know I do. It truly is a fun thing. The last thing is, if you're first time, buy a lot of food. It's fueled by snacks. We buy lots and lots of candy and snacks of that sort. I think you saw a picture of that earlier. Every year the students complain that they want healthier foods, and so we've been adding fruits and vegetables, but frankly those go mostly uneaten. So we have boxes of apples and oranges left over, but nonetheless, food is what fuels the event. What should you expect to spend money on? Well, food. So I think, I haven't done an exact calculation, but I would guess it's 75%, maybe as much as 90% of our budget. We had 240 students participate this year. So this was our biggest year, almost twice what we had last year. It's the most we'll ever allow, because that is just the limit of what we can handle. And food expenses become considerable, and getting the food delivered becomes considerable. It's nice to give T-shirts. The students like to design them, and perhaps you can save money by having the student group make them themselves and sell them themselves. You need to spend some money on prizes. Like I said, we found that the medallions work really nicely. In the past, we had plaques made, but those were very expensive. I know at Duke they gave away Amazon gift certificates, but again, that can get expensive. So the medallions, I think, are what at least we're sticking with. And then finally, there's facilities. I mean, ideally, you will find facilities you can use for free. This year, we had our event up in the dorms, and they had a lot of space they generously let us use for free, and they supplied electricity and internet connections and all sorts of janitorial support. Even so, you may find that you have to request cleanups, and not just at the end of the event, but probably several times a day to remove the trash, to clean the bathrooms. There's more work there than you're used to doing for your usual event. More work even than if you've hosted a conference, because the students may stay all night long. We find that typically very few students stay all night Friday night. I think this year, out of our 240 students, by 3 a.m. almost all of them had gone home, and only maybe 2 or 3 stayed all night long. And then they start to come back around 7 and 8 and 9 in the morning. Saturday night is another story. Many of them stay all night long. You may have expenses associated with extra security for the late night hours and trash and cleanup costs. I should say, in the DataFest in the box, we have some sample budgets for you to see from the various sites that have it, so you can see what our different hosts have spent and where they've spent their money, and that might help you plan. This says an official DataFest agreement, but it's not really official yet, and so don't hold me to it, but this is the gist of it. Basically, if you want to participate as an official ASA DataFest event, we will work long and hard to get a data set that meet our requirements, and if there's time, and I think there will be, I'll give you a brief overview of what we look for in data. This takes a lot of time and energy. Mina at Duke has been absorbing most of this the last couple of years, and I think we'll get you a data set that you probably couldn't get just doing it on your own. In exchange, what we're asking is that we all hold our events at roughly the same time period. We're trying to make this as narrow a time period as we can, but again, it's hard to find venues. There's quarter systems and semester systems and spring breaks and that are all different, so there's a window of opportunity. During this time, we ask that you not divulge any information about the data. We feel that it's important as much as we can to let the students be surprised by the data. I can talk more about that if you want to know my reasons why in the question period. I've asked some of the students how important they think that is, and they think it's pretty important. So we ask that you not divulge any information, which means that in press releases you not talk about the data provider and not reveal who it is. When you post pictures on the internet or in blogs or any other sorts of things, you're careful to not show pictures that might give it away. We understand this may happen accidentally, but we think we should all try really hard to keep it from happening. So what's in the DataFest in the box? So we've got sample instructions for students, visitors, and judges. So from the different sites, we've got several of our kind of best practices of what we tell the students and what we tell our VIP judges and what we our judges and what we tell our VIP visitors. We have official logos that the ASA makes that includes your institution's name on them, so you can use that for publicity and maybe t-shirts. Sample funding requests. We do a lot of fundraising, so a sample of the sort of letter that we send and what we say on the phone. Certificates that we give as prizes and other suggestions along those lines. And of course, when the time is right, through a password-protected link, we provide the data set itself. So there's a core of us who are working on this. Me, Mina Setankaya-Rundle, who's at Duke, Andrew Bray in Massachusetts area, Ben Baumer in the Massachusetts area, Joe Harden at Pomona College, Shannon McClintock-Pelleggi at Emory, and Deb Nolan at Berkeley. So we're going to meet this summer and start. We have 2 tasks. One is to plan the next DataFest, and the other is to sort of solidify what role the ASA is going to play in helping to promote this. That means we're really interested in hearing from you if you want to hold it, host one yourself, about what sort of support you would like, so we can kind of better envision how this might expand. If you want to be added to our listserv, you can email me and ask to be added to the listserv. And certainly if you have any questions, you can email me and be added to the listserv. So I was going to stop right here for questions, but I think I have time to show you just one more slide, which I imagine someone will ask about anyways. And that last slide is what we're looking for in the data set. Most importantly is we're looking for data with a personality, and that means it comes from someone or something that really wants to listen to the students. I think the most important criteria is the sense the students have that their answers matter, their work matters, that it's going to be heard. And so far we've been very successful with that, especially this year, where Edmonds.com listened very intently and gave students feedback and said that they actually learned from the students' work, so that was wonderful. The number of variables is more important than the size itself, but we're looking for really big data. But big for us means about a gigapoint, because we do have to distribute it to many hundreds of students, and if it's too large, it takes too long to distribute. And it needs to run on a laptop, so we're not really going to be expecting anyone to be using Hadoop or anything like that. The context of the data is really important. We try to find an accessible context. So the grid point data with the energy consumption was on the edge there because not all students really understood what was happening. Fortunately, we had grid point there to make the case and to explain things. But LAPD, unfortunately, lots of students know about crime. They can understand that context. Dating, they understood that. So those contexts make it much more accessible and let them develop hypotheses and kind of dive right in and test their theories. It's great if it's something kind of cool and edgy and something that it's clear to them that they wouldn't ordinarily have if they weren't participating in DataFest. So that's it from my point of view. I thank you for listening. I'm going to go back to the screen with my email address if you want to talk to me, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thanks, Rob. Have you found companies very willing to share their data sets with you?
Yeah, that's a very good question. It's not easy to find. Initially, my plan was that we would start out working with nonprofits. I don't know if you consider the LAPD a nonprofit, but that was the start there. And one thing we found was that nonprofits often don't have the resources to get you the data. They sit on lots of data, but it takes a lot of work to get someone to get it out of their database and into a digestible form and explain what the coding systems mean and all that sort of stuff. And so we've kind of ended up working more with corporations. And what we're finding is that they see this as a great publicity opportunity and a great way of recruiting and growing kind of the next generation of talent. We had that kind of realization for the first time with eHarmony, and then Edmonds really drove it in this year, where they really went to an effort to publicize the students who won, to send people there explicitly to do recruiting, although it was a very subtle sort of recruiting, but they made it pretty clear that they saw this as a really valuable event. GridPoint did the same thing. It was very important to them that we do publicity that associated with them so that people would acknowledge the role they were playing in supporting students. So the answer is it is hard, but it's getting easier, and there's, I think, companies do recognize the value in doing this.
What kind of visitor-employer recruiting has taken place, and do you have any examples?
Yeah, so the recruiting, this year for the first time we had companies that asked if they could send human resource people to sit at a desk, and we ended up saying no, partly because it just takes up too much space, but partly because I don't want the students to be thinking that this is a job fair. So the recruiting that happens is pretty subtle. Sometimes it happens just by surprise. A visitor will come up to me and say, they were working with so-and-so and they want to go back and see if they can put an internship together for them or something like that. Other times it's more explicit. Several visitors told me this year that they were on a secret mission to find interns and to recruit people to apply for jobs. But we've had several students who've got jobs or internships directly from this experience. I don't want to name names, I think, but it has happened, and I think there's an expectation on the students' part that that might happen, but we try really hard not to let that interfere with the working relationship they may have with the visitors. We want them to think of them as mentors while they're there, and so that they're kind of feel comfortable disclosing their insecurities and their confusions so that they can solve the problem. But what I do tell visitors is, never will they ever be able to see students working under pressure in a team on an intense problem. That's something they can't simulate in the job interview. I mean, maybe they can simulate it, but not as successfully as they're going to get from visiting here. So they really get to see what students are like as people who are working to solve a problem, and that seems to be very attractive. A very attractive pitch for many visitors.
Do the representatives from the company serve as judges too, or just visitors to walk around and observe? And also, do they go to all the different DataFest events or just yours?
Yeah, so the visitors are just, and the judges are recruited locally. This year, Edmunds.com went through great effort to send their representatives to all of the events. I believe that's true. I'm pretty sure it's true. But otherwise, we recruit from the local chapter. We recruit, we've gotten our development office to help us find visitors. And the same goes for judges. I mean, I think, any sort of combination of talents you want on the judging panel would be fine. They could be all faculty, they could be a mixture of faculty and visitors. One thing we have found is people who visit do not make good judges because they tend to get drawn into a particular team's issues, and they often end up sitting down and working with one or two particular teams for a while, and that kind of makes it hard for them to judge without bias.
Do most of the students use R in DataFest? Does anybody use SAS or other software?
Well, I'm not sure at other institutions, but we teach R, so most of our students use R. But we do have students using SAS. We do have them using Stata. We're software agnostic, although we do make it clear to them that Excel is going to be an uphill climb. That doesn't prevent students from trying to use Excel. We often get first-year students. In our first-year courses, we teach with Fathom and StatCrunch. And we see students using Fathom and StatCrunch. Particularly with Fathom, they maybe can't do quite as much or nearly as much as with R, but they can do something. And we make it clear that the point isn't to win the prize. The point is to have fun and to learn more than you did at the start of the weekend. And in that respect, they can do that with almost any software.
So based on your experience, what kind of students should you recruit for this? How many students should be on each team, and who makes the teams?
Yeah, so students are responsible for finding their own teams. Teams have to have at least 2 and no more than 5 people. They have to sign up as a team and give themselves a team name, and they can't, this year we had a rule that you can't break up teams, but in the past when we had fewer teams, we let them, if in the middle of the weekend they had a big disagreement, they could split up. But now we don't allow that. As far as recruiting students, I mean, I would talk to statistics, math, econ, and computer science majors and put up notices in those departments. But I think, ours is mostly stats majors, but there's quite a variety of majors out there who are interested in it. And maybe math majors come a close second to that, but pretty much anyone who's interested in data would be interested in this.
What's the ideal number of teams for an event like this?
Well, that is driven by how much time you want to spend judging. So you figure 5 minutes per presentation and you do the math from there. It adds up quickly, and what we did this year with 240 students, we had 60 teams. And we broke them into groups of 20 more or less on average. Still not sure I'm happy with how that happened, but and we had 9 judges. We had 3 panels of 3 judges judging them, and that took about 2 hours. And then each panel of judges selected 2 finalists, and then those 6 finalists went head-to-head in front of the full panel of judges, and we chose the winners from there.
Okay, you mentioned that some of the students stay there all night. Did the judges have to stay all night too?
Judges only show up at the very end, just for the presentations. So our judges show up around 1 or 1:30, and we get them situated in the room, and then they listen to the presentations and they choose the winners, and they go home. As far as visitors, we try to make sure that there is an official visitor at all hours of the day. How that works depends on your institution. There have been years when we couldn't find anyone, and we kicked people out at at 2 or 3 a.m. whenever the last. This is where having graduate students comes in handy. Although this year we had 2 of our senior faculty stay from 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. on Friday night. So it's nice if that happens, and it'll vary with your institution. So because we're in a dorm this year, they told us that we didn't really have to be there because they have someone there around the clock anyways, so they were happy to to keep the room going. But in past years when we've had it at another place, they insisted that there be an official quote-unquote person there all the time. So you'll just have to kind of work out what works best for you.
Okay. Do you have any advice for a remote area that has limited access to professional statisticians or industry experts?
Well, I would say start small and just recruit your faculty to come. Sometimes, even experienced statistics faculty are a little intimidated because they think, well, I don't know anything about this area. But almost always the advice the students need is not technical. Technical issues do come up, but the students are really good about taking ownership of those and using the internet and all other resources to solve them. What they really need is strategic advice, how to break the problem into smaller pieces. I found that the question of why do you want to do that almost always answers their problem, because the answer is almost always, oh, there's no good reason. We just got kind of hyper-focused on accomplishing this strange little task. But I think one thing you'll learn is that the students really surprise you. They do, I mean, they do things that I know they would never do in class, that I couldn't get them to do on a project. So they really go far beyond what you would expect them to do, and I think what they expect themselves to do.
Now, when you're working through and cleaning up the data, do you also analyze it and come up with all the answers ahead of time? And either way, are you ever surprised with what the students learn about the data and present?
Yeah, so the data is far too complex to provide a set of answers. And the directions, the charges are fairly vague. So like this year, what Edmunds.com's told the students they wanted, and they made it very clear that this is what their statistician's daily job is they wanted the students to give them advice on how to improve the customer shopping experience on their website. So it's a very general charge, and so there's an infinite number of ways of approaching that. So we're pretty much surprised by every presentation. I mean, there are some common themes to presentations, and you see students kind of often approaching things in a similar way, but every presentation is unique and does something different from another one. We do clean the data, but the data are not clean. Cleaning usually means, and most of this is done by the provider of the data, usually means stripping the data of identifiers, sometimes adding anonymous, adding some noise to make things anonymous, and making sure that there's some consistency. The coding, we almost always uncover some problem. What we do is a couple of weeks before the event, we all kind of take a stab at like, what analysis would I do, and see if there are any roadblocks that make such a thing insurmountable, and if there are, we talk about how to solve them. And the best example I can think of that, again, is the very first year the LAPD had spatial coordinates for each of the arrests, so they would know where they were. but they were coded in a very bizarre system that none of us could figure out, so we couldn't apply it to any mapping software. So fortunately, we caught that ahead of time, and we were able to spend some time trying to figure out how to translate the LAPD's spatial coordinates to latitude and longitude, and so that was an example of some assistance we provided. This year, the data needed much less assistance, but I guess I should say one thing we do is think about what approaches students might take, and then we offer seminars up ahead of time to help prepare them. So for example, a seminar on how to make maps, how to handle date formats, how to organize data, how to use in ggplot or dplyr or particular things like that. And in some years during the event we have mini seminars where we'll just tell everyone, if you want to learn more about making maps, come into such and such room and we'll do a 20-minute presentation, and then they can send one member of their team to kind of become the map expert, for example, and then come back. Sometimes the seminars have been on basic things like subsetting data, creating new variable names, things like that we think students need some help on.
Is there any chance you would put those workshops online and available to everybody?
No, the workshops are done at each institution, and in fact, like this year, we actually didn't do them ourselves. Our undergraduate students organized them on their own, and they recruited people. They turned out to be graduate students who they liked to come and talk to them and give them some advice. I know other sites are doing their own, and maybe some of them are online, but that might be a nice thing to think about adding to the DataFest in the box.
What's the profile of a typical student who participates in this?
That's a good question. They tend to be juniors and seniors. They tend to be, but I think we still had about maybe 20% second-year students. They tend to be stats majors because we have a stats major, but applied math is a close second. Econ is up there. Computer science and engineering are also up there. And mostly it tends to be their first. This year we had a lot of first-time people, but a lot of the sophomores tell me that they plan to do it every year that they can. So they're joining early in particular to kind of gain some experience.
What about male versus female?
Oh gosh, I haven't checked, but I would guess it's about 50%. It's a pretty good split.
Okay. Well, I think that's about all we have time for. We did have several people asking when the PowerPoints will be available, and I'm assuming those will go up on CauseWeb in the webinar section, teaching and learning section, within the next few days. So we'll have those available to people. I would like to thank all of you for your wonderful questions, and I would especially like to thank Rob Gould for his presentation and his enthusiasm for DataFest, this valuable project. I want to remind all of you that there's a short survey when you log out of the webinar, and it would be great if you would fill that out for us. And I hope to see all of you soon at USCOT. Thank you.
Thank you.